nailing the basics, putting in the effort, and remaining solution-oriented so that you can identify what's really holding you back in your career. All on this episode of the Take Back Your Career podcast.
You need to take action, and you're about to get real-world information and insight for fixing your career. This is the Take Back Your Career podcast with your host, Adam Fullerton.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Take Back Your Career podcast, which is dedicated to helping you find happiness, fulfillment, and financial security in the work that you do. And we do this by interviewing real career coaches and experts who can provide actionable ideas which can produce real results for you. And today, our guest and expert is Jeff Sierra, who is a career consultant at Lee Hecht Harrison and owner of Mind Fuel, where he provides career coaching services to help companies and individuals maximize performance. Jeff is also an ICF Associate Certified Coach. Jeff, how's it going? Thanks for being on this podcast. I am excited for this conversation. I know we have a lot in store for our listeners. So again, thanks for being here. Thanks for doing this. And again, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Adam. I'm excited to be here as well and looking forward to our conversation.
Fantastic. Well, the pleasure, the honor, I should say, is all mine. So again, thanks for doing this. And I want to kick things off like I always do. I want to ask about you, Jeff. I've heard your story a little bit through our conversation, but I want our listeners to understand who you are and why you got into career coaching and what do you do with your clients? How do you, as a career coach, help people get from point A to point B? And you know, point A, at least for us and my listeners, is people that feel stuck and miserable and unhappy, and point B being, I'm fulfilled. I have financial security. I'm happy. I enjoy waking up and going to work and doing the things that I do for my career. So I'd like to hear, and I'd like our listeners to hear about your story, how you got into career coaching, and again, how do you help your clients?
Fantastic. Yeah. So, in terms of my story, I've got a pretty broad business background. I spent a lot of years in the marketing world, marketing services world, working with Fortune 500 clients, developing marketing-based solutions. And I was really lucky to, hold a lot of different kinds of roles at different levels of organizations, from, operations perspective as well as sales and marketing perspective. And after doing that for a long time, I decided I kind of wanted to go off on my own and do something different, and started my own consulting practice and started to work with a wide variety of companies, and first started really kind of focused on business process improvement. That kind of pretty quickly morphed into more specific coaching, because I found I was just having individual kind of conversations with leaders and organizations about how can I help them to do their jobs better. And that was something I gained a lot of pleasure from, in helping people, and something that I was able to then kind of focus on and turn into, where my full-time focus was. And that led me to, the executive coaching, the career coaching that I do today. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. In terms of, I guess the other part of your question is, how do I help people, right? And I think there's a lot of different ways, and it kind of depends on the individual and what they're looking for and kind of where they're at. But I think in terms of the audience that we're talking with, as you said, there's, a lot of people out there who have a pretty high level of dissatisfaction in the workplace, right? There's all sorts of statistics about that. And, I saw a recent survey that said only about 40% of people in the workplace can say that they're very satisfied in their role.
Not to cut you off, I feel like that's even a high number. Maybe I'm wrong based on my experience and the peers that I had and the people I worked with, but I feel like 40% is a very high number. But again, maybe that's just my bias. I'm not sure.
No, I'd agree with you, right? There's lots of different surveys and there's different numbers on that, right? And I think it's, certainly fair to say that well over half, 60, 70% of the workforce out there is probably, experiencing some level of dissatisfaction, right? When I talk to people about kind of where they're at in their career and what's driving their dissatisfaction, there's also a bunch of kind of common things that you hear, right? There's all, specific things that people struggle with, but there's a set of common things, and we've all probably experienced or heard them. My boss is terrible. he or she is a jerk. I don't like working for them. They micromanage me. I don't get any appreciation and no recognition at work. Or clients that I work with are really tough, and I don't like the clients. Just a general kind of disconnect between one's expectations of the work environment and the work itself and the reality of what it is, right? So, if you think about some of those examples that I just used, most of those are, what I would kind of say outwardly focused, right? They're about, other things or other people that are driving my dissatisfaction. And although that can be very real, I'm really big on kind of personal accountability and ownership. And one of the places that I always start with people is saying, how can we take kind of an introspective look and do a little bit of a self-assessment? And that's not easy to do for most of us, right? And it's certainly not easy to do on your own. That's why people come to career coaches and find a mentor or hire a therapist, whatever it might be. But I think that there are definitely some ways to kind of do that self-evaluation and ask yourself a series of some pretty simple questions that if you really challenge yourself on, you can kind of get down to potentially some actionable steps that you can take, some things that you can control that may indeed start to possibly either, turn your situation around and help you find some greater joy, or at a minimum, maybe start to give you a little different perspective, and also sometimes help you conclusively, kind of decide I am in the wrong place, either the wrong role or the wrong company, and I'm sure now I gotta do something.
Yeah. Well, before jumping into those questions, I want to say I like, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, but I like the idea of taking things that you are in control of, taking the situation. I guess there's external factors, there's internal factors, but if you look internally, based on everything I've learned and I've experienced in my own life, in my own career, is that you can kind of try to change everything around you, or you can kind of look inward and take ownership of the situation and what your skills are and your knowledge, your mindset, whatever it might be. And you can say, okay, this is where I'm lacking. This is what I can do about it. This is what, I'm in control of. And I think that's, hopefully to your point, to your questions, that's something that I think empowers people to make the change themselves instead of relying on someone else to make the change or some external factor to make the change for them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you're dead on, and I think those are the key steps to take. I saw this cartoon on LinkedIn the other day. It kind of speaks to, I think, kind of where we're going. And it's these two kind of drawing figures of these two guys. And one guy's wearing a t-shirt that says happiness. And the other guy says, hey, where did you find that? I've been looking for that everywhere. And the guy says, I created it myself. Right. So, it's kind of this self-fulfilling thing. I believe in a big way that happiness is a choice, and again, there's a lot of factors that go into that, internal and external, as you said, but yeah, it's about focusing on first, at least, what can you control?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so then let's, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off again. I was going to say, let's say that person then is looking for they're looking internally, like, you mentioned. How do we start, especially with your clients? Where do you go? You said you have a couple questions or a few questions. I'd love to know, obviously, what those questions are and how someone listening, someone that's, again, sitting behind this computer, their desk or whatever, and they're saying, so far I like you, Jeff. I'm open ears. I want to make change. How do I do it? What are these questions? What should people look at or reflect on to change their situation altogether?
Yeah, absolutely. So, they're basic and they're simple questions. It doesn't mean that they're easy to answer or easy to, kind of challenge yourself on. But I think that's part of the key. So the first question is just this, am I nailing the basics of what it takes to do my job? Right. So this is about kind of, having the fundamental skills to be really good, at what, it is that you do. And that skill set, it's going to vary depending on, the kinds of role that you might be in. It's different from role to role, but there's also some universal kind of basics, right? And I'll talk about those in a minute. But the basics, even though they're fundamental things, again, not easy to master sometimes. Sometimes it takes, a really long time to get a solid handle on the baseline skills that it takes to be really good. Yeah, and I saw recently a quote from Kobe Bryant, right, the great basketball player, and the quote was, "I never get tired of focusing on the basics." And I think that's, you stay in the sports analogy realm. You look at some of the greatest athletes in the world. Most of them will point to, I really honed my fundamentals, right? Look at Wayne Gretzky in hockey. Look at Serena Williams in tennis. The list goes on and on and on. And these are people who say, I was relentless about getting really good about the fundamentals. And why was that? It's because, one, they become a foundation to build on, right? And they're kind of that starting point to get yourself potentially to a different place. The other thing is, I think when you're really, really good at the basics, you have a certain level of confidence in what you're able to do. And confidence is this huge, huge catalyst for performance, right? If you're confident in what you can do, your performance is typically strong. And, high performance and success is often, goes hand in hand with a level of satisfaction and happiness that you derive. Not always, right? I mean, I know people who've been, deemed as very, very successful, made a ton of money, rose to high places in organizations, and they were miserable, right? But by and large, if you're doing a good job, you're going to have some confidence. And that confidence is going to be a catalyst, not only for yourself, but it also is something that creates a really strong perception that others can see. And if you're exuding those kinds of qualities, I think others, start to have more confidence in you. You might be looked at as more of a go-to person. You increase your level of credibility. And as you do those things, those are things in and of themselves that can start to create new opportunities for you in your current environment.
Yeah, of course. I agree. And I think nailing the fundamentals, like you said, there's so many benefits for our listeners to do that. And so you obviously just explained, again, what those benefits are. And so I want to ask you then a quick question about someone who, maybe they are in the job or career path that they enjoy, right? They're saying, okay, I need to kind of look at the fundamentals. I need to look at the basics. I need to make sure that I'm nailing those and I'm killing it. And that's going to open up opportunities. What would you say to someone who doesn't want to nail the basics because they're just unhappy? Maybe this job just isn't for them. Do you think, hey, it's good still try to nail the basics because it could open up opportunities in the future that you maybe weren't thinking about? Or do you pivot? I guess my question is, what about someone who is sitting there saying, I don't want to know the basics of this because I just don't enjoy what I do? What would you say to that type of person?
Well, I think I would probably, challenge them a little bit on that and say, well, give me an example of something you can do and be successful at and enjoy that you suck at. That's part of your thing. Mondays suck, right? Well, again, can you really look hard at yourself and say, there's something I can improve in. Now, also maybe to answer your question, I'm a huge believer in that you should align yourself around your strengths, right? People who are accentuating their strengths also, again, tend to enjoy, what their activities and what their work might be that help them to utilize those strengths, right? And I think there's often more value in sometimes building on the strengths rather than trying to improve in areas of weakness. And so maybe that's another idea for those people who say, maybe I don't want to build, my skills or think more about that. It's maybe shift the mindset just a little bit to say, okay, well, what are you good at? And how do those things align with what it takes to do your current job? And if they don't, how do those things align with something else? And then that's a whole nother podcast, for how do you then, go in that direction.
Well, and I think too, that one of the things I've learned through just these conversations and again, in my own experience is that You could also just be really good at the basics, and people might say, I'm not good at the basics, and they might think that they're lacking for some reason, but it could, and that's what's causing them to be unhappy or feel like this job isn't for them. But to your point, I mean, they could be really good at the basics. They could have those strengths identified and be really good at them, but maybe it's not the basics. Maybe it's not the strengths that are lacking. Maybe it is those external factors. Maybe it is the fact that your boss is a jerk. Maybe it is the fact that the organization doesn't align with what an industry or a mission that you align with. And so therefore you don't feel that drive. So, I just want to throw that out there and say, of course, there's internal things that people should conquer or should be really good at to see, again, how far are you into this path of nailing the basics to see if there are other opportunities. But sometimes it's also, I think, fine for people to say, I'm good at what I'm doing. It's just not right for me because of the company, because of my boss, or because of the industry. And that's okay. Maybe it's just time to move industries or move companies altogether.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with you completely. And again, this is kind of why I use the foundation of these three questions. If at the end of it, you can answer affirmatively, yes, I'm doing all these things, and you're still, miserable and unhappy, that to me, again, is the indicator that, yep, then those external factors are probably the bigger thing.
Right.
But it's just too easy for all of us to kind of immediately go there, Sure. And that's why I like to really push hard on trying to answer these questions honestly for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's say then someone's nailing the basics, or they're asking them that question. The assessment is, are you nailing the basics? Are you killing it at the fundamentals? You understand, of course, why it's important. Where do we go from there? What's next in terms of questions and self-reflection in this assessment that you have?
Yeah. So, the next question is, am I really putting in the effort that's expected? And again, this is very simple. It's very basic, but it's so important because, again, I think it's an area where there's a huge disconnect a lot of times between, what I think working hard is and what the expectation of my employer or my teammates or my boss is, right? So there's an element of, how do you level that? And I think part of that starts with, I think most employers out there expect people to give 100% all the time, right? I mean, if you're my boss, Adam, and I come to you and say, hey, Adam, you know what? I think I'm just going to give 50% today. Is that cool? If I do, I'll probably miss some deadlines and I might screw some stuff up and, it might affect a customer, but that's all I got today. I'm just going 50%.
Right.
And you go, well, yeah, that's cool. I think I'm just going 75% today, but, I hope customer service is at 100% because if we screw some stuff up, they're going to have to fix it.
Right.
I mean, this is like, I think it's a ludicrous conversation, right? But the reality is, I think a lot of people think that, I think a lot of people go in every day to say, I don't have it today. I'm not going to give 100% and I'm going to skate through. And the vicious cycle of that is, well, why am I not going to give, 100%? Well, because my boss is a jerk, right? And why should I work hard for him or her, right? Or, it kind of goes back to all those kind of external factors. So again, you got to weigh that out. But I think, before you make the decision that it's always the external factors, really push yourself and say, can I give just a little bit more than I am? And what would that look like? And what might be the result from that? There's this, we were talking about it once before, there's this, it's a little book, it's called 212 Degrees. And I think it's this really cool concept. And it's about the temperature with which water boils, 212 degrees, right? So everything up until 212 degrees, the water is hot. But when it hits that mark, 212, it starts to boil. And boiling water creates steam, and steam can literally power a locomotive. And so the concept is that this 1 degree of difference in terms of effort can have this exponential, effect on change at an individual level, at a company level, at a team level, whatever it might be. And so I think it's important to kind of explore and challenge, what if I could give just a little bit more in my role? What would that be? Maybe you find that if you're able to do that, you become a little bit more productive. Maybe if you get a little bit more done in the course of the day, you feel better at the end of the day. Maybe you have just, 1 or 2 less things on your plate for tomorrow morning. And that makes it just a little bit easier to be looking to come in again tomorrow morning, right?
Right.
And so if you can sometimes make just these small changes of effort and commitment, it can really start to uncover some new opportunities that are self-fulfilling and start to generate a little bit more joy in what you're doing.
Absolutely. And I think it's important too to note that, yeah, if you're not putting in 100%, start there, obviously. But also you need to, the dichotomy there, or the balance there, in my opinion, is, and this is obviously leading into the external factors, is if you feel like you're not putting 100% in, put the 100% in and see what happens. And of course, be patient, give it time. But there's also the balance there in that if someone's just putting in what they feel is 110% every single day and they aren't getting where they want to go, now I think, to your point, start looking at those external factors. Take the all the things that could be the problem or the issue, start checking them off. All the things you can control, start checking them off. And then eventually it sounds like if you're left with something that says, well, I'm still not happy even though I'm doing all these things that I can do, then yeah, we've identified the external factors and the things that are truly holding you back and are making you miserable and making you feel stuck or just not able to grow or advance or whatever you want to call it. Is that am I picking up on what you're saying?
You got it. Absolutely, you got it.
Well, then I love the analogy. I love the book. I think it's a powerful concept because, again, it is all about that 1 degree of difference that says if you beforehand, before at 211, I guess it's going to be, is that you're just hot water, but at 212 you can power anything and you can make the change you're looking for. So if you put in that just a little bit of extra effort, it can open up opportunities that you never again saw possible. And I think that's just a truly powerful story to hear.
Yeah. And again, not to belabor it, but I think, again, there's a huge aspect of perception here, right? I will tell you, if you go back to the first one, we talked about having the skills, right, wrong, or otherwise, hard work can often make up for a lack of ability in a lot of ways. And I think if you're perceived as somebody who always gives an effort, that in and of itself in a lot of organizations can open up some doors and, again, change other people's perception of you.
And I think too, it just gives you the power, right? It gives you the like you said earlier, being in charge of your own situation. Excuse me, but it gives you the confidence and the power to say, I have been doing everything, 100%, 110%. I've been busting my butt for this organization, and it gives you that, again, level of confidence, knowing what you've provided and what you've done. And so nobody can come back at you and say, well, you haven't been really, working hard. You haven't been showing up on time, or all those things are out the window.
Yes.
Because I guess in the art of negotiation or having those conversations, that gives you leverage, and leverage gives you the ability to, I guess, command the situation a little bit more. Obviously, you're not the boss, you're not, the manager or whatnot, but it gives you the ability to stand tall and say, I've been working hard, I've been doing everything very well, and again, things are just working out, or maybe they because you started doing 100%, maybe things, new doors do open.
Yeah, and exactly, again, if things aren't working out, if they're not changing, and you can honestly, look to this one and say, I am sure that I've given everything I can to this myself, and it's still not, where I want it to be, then again, great indicator that something else needs to change. Yeah.
So we talked about the basics. We talked about the fundamentals and looking internally and seeing if you're crushing those. We've talked about the effort, the amount of effort and what it can do to you, for you, or I guess in terms of opportunity and whether, you're half-assing it, so to speak, or you're giving it all. So what do we do next? Where do we go from there?
Yeah. So the question that I think is critically important in this mix is, are you solution focused in your approach to the workplace? And that's, some people might say, well, okay, is that a positive attitude? Well, maybe that's a component of it, but I think it's more of a mindset, and it's also a set of habits that go along with that. There's it's pretty easy for most of us to identify problems, and it's a little bit harder to come up with the right solution. But if you can have a mindset of trying to find that solution and trying to present that idea or that solution in a positive way, again, I've seen it just, be a huge catalyst. I get tired of that whole, cliche is, it's not a problem, it's an opportunity, right? Or don't be part of the problem, be part of the solution. And that, maybe sounds like kind of where I'm going with this, and that's a component of it, but you can be the kind of person where you identify a problem and say, gosh, I don't know why we do X, Y, and Z. We should be doing 1, 2, and 3. And some people, say that to themselves under their breath. And other people might commiserate with their teammates about that at lunch and talk about it. But again, from my experience, the people who can, do those things, but then also maybe say, I want to talk to the right person, or I want to put together a little plan on how we can do 1, 2, and 3. And see where it goes. And again, so too often people go, well, I'm going to get shut down, or, hey, I brought ideas to the table before, nobody listens to me. You got to be relentless, I think, sometimes to be the catalyst to make change happen. Again, if you can take some ownership in that and bring forward, here's what I think might be the solution to this problem, even if it's the wrong solution, even if it's something, your solution might not even be feasible to implement. Well, this would be better, but, I think to do it, we need a new CRM system. And, it's going to cost $3 million to implement a corporate-wide CRM system. And, maybe that's not in the budget, right? I think, again, about perception, people who are bringing forth those ideas, even if they don't go all the way to fruition, are making that effort for change. They're taking some ownership of their environment and the things that they're involved with every day. And that again can be something that can derive some happiness, simply coming up with a new idea. And then, if you're able to push it or get some leverage with it and actually see a change, that can be huge. It can make your job easier. It can make your team's jobs easier. And again, it's that perception, I think, that it creates about, what your attitude is and what your drive is, when you're trying to succeed every day in your role.
Well, and I think too, it kind of leads into what you said for question number 2, again, just about the effort that you're putting in. I think realistically, this will be a quick way to identify whether it's external or internal, is that if you say to the organization that you work for that, hey, there's an opportunity here, and they say, that's awesome, great idea, great perspective, great thinking, awesome for bringing this up, but we're not going to do anything with it. Immediately, what's the point, right? You're going to get shut down, and you can identify the external factor right then and there. Or maybe they say, hey, again, thanks for bringing this up, we'll look into it. Maybe we don't have the budget to what you just said, if they don't have the $3 million or whatever, but if you come to the table saying, I'm here to help the organization grow, and here's an idea that I thought of. And if you pass that on, then that's you again showing that you're solution-oriented, which the organization should appreciate from the get-go. And I always like to say personally in my life, and this is something that I've just taken on as I've matured and grown older, I guess, is that there's always a silver lining in every single problem. It's whether you're looking for it or not and willing to identify it or not. And that can, in my opinion, be used for literally every single thing. There's problems that arise all the time, whether in your career, your job, or life in general, but you can always take something. There's always a nugget of information or a lesson learned that you can take out of it and do something with. And so I think that to your point, if you look at these problems that arise in your job or your role or the company, if you're willing to put in the effort, and then part of that saying, hey, there's an opportunity for us to grow, that should open up opportunities potentially in terms of respect from the organization and your peers and your managers. And again, that can lead to new opportunities because they say you obviously thought ahead. You saw that silver lining. You saw that opportunity for us to do something better. And we like that. We want those types of people working here, and that's going to build just a better team, better morale for the organization. No?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, all of those things are results and derivatives of taking this approach, and again, context, coming up with ideas or solutions to problems it doesn't have to be on this kind of big grand scale that impacts the entire organization. It can be something really small. Most organizations, have a set of of processes that they try to follow. Some are much more, defined and consistent with that. Others don't, but all of us have a series of whatever our job is. There's always a set of steps that need to be taken to get things done, right? And so sometimes identifying a little different way to follow or implement the process that you're closest to day to day are the things that need to be focused on. These just small little changes that are easy to change. Maybe you just need somebody's confirmation to say, we do it this way. Can I do it this way, going forward instead? And they go, yeah, that makes sense. Cool. And it's done. But it's those little things that might add up to, and again, to your point, that then maybe your supervisor, whomever you work with, whether you love them or not, starts to look at you a little bit differently. And that can, again, be a positive thing. Yeah, exactly.
That's powerful. I like your process. I like these three questions because, again, it identifies where the problem is. Is it something that you are in charge of, or is it something that is affecting you externally? And I think just starting there to identify where the problem is coming from, first and foremost, I think that's powerful. I think that, again, allows the person to be, our listeners, to be in charge of the situation instead of sitting there and just wondering and waiting, but saying, hey, let's start. We can start checking these things off the list to see where the problem's coming from and what we can do about it. So I want to ask you then, if someone is listening and they like these questions, they're doing this self-assessment, maybe they've identified that they're not giving their all, or they haven't crushed the basics, or whatever it might be, they're maybe a negative Nancy, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but say there's problems and I don't want to do anything about it. Instead of offering solutions, they just complain about it. I mean, those are things that people can change, and that's a habit, right? That you can fix, I guess, or adjust. So someone's sitting there saying, "I've got this internal assessment checklist type thing. I've got potentially, I've identified whether it's external or not. What do we do next?" When you work with your clients and you say, okay, we figured it out, it's internal, we figured it out, it's external, how do they make the change from that point on? And of course, I want to say that I want to wrap this up into asking you, of course, about, again, how you work with your clients, what success has looked like for you. I'd love for you to obviously share with our listeners where they can find you, because I think these are all just questions that go together. They all go together, I guess, for lack of a better term, and it helps our listeners understand what the next steps are once they've identified the problem. Sure. And the factors and the influences, sure. I guess. Yeah.
So when I work with people and we work through, this set of questions or something similar, there's always a set of actions that come out of it, right? So in your example, if we're identifying, there's some inward focused things that we can make a change on, then together we kind of set that action plan and we identify, what do you need to do to improve the skill set? What do you need to do specifically? And what are you going to do to, improve your level or increase your level of effort? And then the same thing around solutions. So it becomes an action plan that you own, and that I help you to be accountable to. If it's those external factors and you say, I am nailing it on all these things and Mondays still really are just, horrible, then, there's another kind of series of exercises that I often do with people. And it's about kind of identifying your personal vision and your personal mission. What does that really mean for you? And then looking at how that, as well as some of your intrinsic values, align with the company and where you're at today. And if we know there's a disconnect, there's usually, it's not working out right. And then how do you take that personal vision and mission and align it with potential target organizations and or roles that are out there that might be the better fit for you, where you can, find some more joy in what you're doing.
Yeah. And I'll say that our previous episode, our previous guest, I like that perspective. I think that, again, if you go with your clients to the next step to say, okay, it is the external factors, it's good to kind of, what you said, look at your personal mission, or as our previous guest said, kind of your life goals, and finding organizations and work that help you achieve what you want in life, instead of kind of just trying to find a new job, and potentially get into this vicious cycle, every couple of years. So I think it's a great perspective. It's a great tactic. And I truly, of course, like I said, I want you to be able to speak to your business and where our listeners can find you, because I want our listeners to say, Jeff, everything you sounds you said sounds great. I'd love to do this kind of assessment or work with you. If they identify it's external, work with you more to go down kind of that secondary path or whatever you want to call it. So again, I think it's a great perspective, and I'd love for you to just take a moment and let our listeners know that if they want to hear from you and connect with you and learn more about this assessment and take that with you and partner with you, how they can find you and where they can go to connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And my personal mission, by the way, is simply to help others succeed. That's what I'm all about, and that's what I try to do. So I would love to do that for anybody who's finding any sort of relevance in what we're talking about. So, it's really easy to find me on LinkedIn. Again, search my name, Jeff Sierra, Sierra. You can find me on LinkedIn, reach out through the chat, connect with me. You can visit my website, mindfuel1.com. That's mindfuel1.com. Or email me direct, jeff.sierra@mindfuel1.com.
Awesome, Jeff. Well, hey, I appreciate you being on this. I think this is a great episode. I know we have several other topics that we were talking about, from leadership development to interviewing skills and acing the interview, as you like to call it. And I think it's worth having you back on for those future conversations because, again, I like what we talked about today. I think it's going to be beneficial for our listeners to take this assessment and identify what the problems are and where they might be lacking themselves in their own efforts or their own, knowledge of the skills of the job, and whether they're being solution oriented or just seeking problems and doing nothing about it, and of course not realizing the impact or the limitations that can set on their career. So again, Jeff, I want to say thank you one more time for being on. I'm gonna just let you get the last word in before we wrap up, and to all of our listeners out there, thank you for listening to this episode, and I look forward to having you back on, Jeff, hopefully in the future, and having those other topics brought up and helping our listeners ace those topics as well, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me today. I've enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully your audience finds a little bit of value in it. And excited to come back and talk about a lot of other topics that we know are relevant out there and that people are looking for help on.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, thanks again for being on. I look forward to those conversations, and I look forward to, this episode being out there and helping our listeners. I truly do think it was helpful, and it will impact the careers and the lives of our listeners. So again, thank you for doing this. And that's really it for today's episode, guys. That's everything that we wanted to cover, or I guess that we had time to cover. So again, just remember a quick wrap up here is that according to Jeff in the statistic he found is that 40% of people are satisfied or, somewhat satisfied with their job. And based on my experience, I'd say it's lower, but again, it doesn't really matter. The point is you're not alone in this problem. You're not alone in facing the challenge of being miserable. There's so many people out there that feel the way you do, and you need to take ownership of that. You need to identify the fact that you can do something about it. And with Jeff on today, this assessment gives you the power to do something with your situation. And again, the assessments are as simple as this. Simple questions, as Jeff liked to say, but not easy to answer. And those are you nailing the basics of your job and killing it with the fundamentals? And of course, understanding why that's important for your career in the growth and the opportunities in front of you. Are you giving the effort that's really required and matching that with what the employer expects out of you? And then of course, are you solution oriented? Are you trying to find problems, or maybe if problems come up, do you find solutions or at least propose ideas instead of just kind of sweeping it under the rug? And if you do take the approach or the perspective of, hey, this might not be my lane or part of the team that I'm on, but I'm here to help. I'm here to let the organization grow. That too can lead to opportunities for you. And doing this assessment will identify if it's something you're doing yourself that's limiting you, or if it's something that the organization is doing that is limiting you. And if you identify that, you can make the change, or at least you know the path that you should go down to make the change that you're looking for. So again, that's my wrap up of this whole session. Jeff, thanks again for being on. I hope you guys learned a lot from this episode. And as always, I will catch you guys on the next episode. We release an episode every single Monday. So with all of that said, thanks once more, and I will catch you guys on the next episode. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Take Back Your Career podcast with your host, Adam Fullerton. the podcast dedicated to giving you expert advice and actionable ideas so that you can achieve real results and finally take back your career. Like what you heard in today's episode? Consider leaving a 5-star review and visiting takebackyourcareerpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify for more episodes. And remember, Mondays shouldn't suck, and neither should finding help. Thanks for listening to Take Back Your Career Podcast.